Geek Truth.
Hey, it's 64. It's 64.
Yeah, what he said.
Come on, man. It's Geek Truth 64.
Whatever. We are here to review Venom.
I am not on my set today. It is currently under construction as I rearrange everything, but as I said, I'm going to be reviewing Venom today, so let's get to it. So I went in this movie with a very low bar set for it for 4 reasons. So number 4 would be having a Venom origin story without Spider-Man is a big wasted opportunity, and I'll come back to this point a little later, but let's move on to 3 through 1. So number 3 is Sony, number 2 is Sony, and number 1 is, yeah, you guessed it, Sony. Sony is a terrible production company, the worst in operation today. In the last 3 years, they've given us such gems as The Fifth Wave, The Dark Tower, Ghostbusters 2016, Peter Rabbit, Pixels, Paul Blart Mall Cop 2, and the most amazing animated movie of all time, The Emoji Movie. Oh yeah, and that other movie they did, what was it called? Oh, Amazing Spider-Man 2. The movie that unseated Spider-Man 3 as the worst Spider-Man movie of all time. Sony is a sad excuse for a movie studio, and they constantly meddle with the creators at their studios during production. Such is the case with Venom. So Venom was directed by Ruben Fleischer, who previously directed Zombieland and Gangster Squad. But he hasn't done a whole lot in the last few years, though he is on tap to finally bring Zombieland 2 to theaters close to its 10th anniversary. Zombieland's a great movie. Go watch that instead of Venom. So back to this. So there are some pretty good shots in Venom. However, the movie is all over the place due to its editing. It is rumored to be missing some 45 minutes of the movie, and I absolutely believe that after seeing Venom. The pacing is all over the place, and it seems to be solely because huge chunks of the movie have been removed. This is the same thing that Sony did to Amazing Spider-Man and Amazing Spider-Man 2. Sony also did a similar kind of thing with Ghostbusters 2016 in the opposite direction, because the whole movie was almost entirely improv. There was like 16 to 18 hours of film that they whittled down into this turd of a movie called Ghostbusters 2016. And it was about a 2-hour movie. So they took 18 hours and then dropped it down to 2 hours. And really, that still wasn't short enough. I think 2 minutes would have been sufficient, or, it not existing at all. But I digress. The other thing Sony does is it constantly puts the final scene of its movies in the trailers, which is the dumbest thing possible, because as a moviegoer, you know in the back of your mind that a certain scene hasn't happened yet, and it kills any potential suspense or drama there might have been for that movie. So as you can tell, I pretty much hate Sony. I make no secret of it. So for Venom, the parts with Tom Hardy as Eddie interacting with Venom are basically the only thing that really works in this movie. Their interactions try their best to hold up the film, but there is too much mediocrity weighing this thing down. It really seems like they stole the plot of any generic movie from the early 2000s. So basically, just imagine something like Daredevil, the movie with Venom, or Blade, Trinity with Venom, and you start to get a pretty clear picture of what you're getting into with this movie. And I'm just going to add this real quick. There is absolutely no reason why this thing should not have been rated R. We have Logan, Deadpool, like they prove superhero movies that are rated R. People are going to go see them. There's absolutely no reason why this wasn't rated R. I'm guessing the only reason why is because they hope to maybe, possibly, probably mix this version of Venom in with Spider-Man in a later date, and that's why they didn't want to make it rated R. But regardless, I was laughing at several parts that should have been really gruesome. They were so ridiculous looking at it in PG-13. Like, some dude's head gets bit off, they cut away, and then his body just disappears, and I was laughing out loud in the theater. The plot is paper thin and predictable with your run-of-the-mill evil corporate guy. It's not completely terrible as much as it is just predictable and unoriginal, and therefore that's what makes it terrible. But what is actually pretty awful is the way the characters change their entire motivations in between scenes. Again, this comes back to the crappy editing. Several characters change completely without any explanation. I don't even know what changed their minds. I have no idea because it was probably cut out of the movie. There are also some issues with some rules that they establish within the movie that they promptly break towards the end of the film. But I'm not even going to talk about anything specific because, again, I think this will get into spoiler territory. And this is a spoiler-free review, which I try to do in all of my reviews. So we're going to keep it spoiler-free. You just have to see the movie in order, and you'll know what I'm talking about. The last 20 minutes of Venom is the most forced superhero battle ending since Fant Four Stick. Now, don't get me wrong, it's nowhere near as bad as Fan Four Stick, but it seems just as out of place as the ending of Fan Four Stick because the movie segues into that end scene with all the grace of a drunken monkey. Again, this seems to come back to the editing. Clearly there were scenes that might explain this that were taken out, but based on what we got, it makes pretty much absolutely no sense and comes out of left field. So I want to come back to that point that I brought up at the very beginning in regards to Spider-Man. You really need Spider-Man in order to tell Venom's story properly. Venom is arguably Spider-Man's greatest villain. I mean, you could argue it's Green Goblin, but if you grew up in the 90s, it was definitely Venom. So this is what I believe is the proper way to tell the Venom Eddie Brock story. Let Marvel actually tell the Secret Wars story. That's how the symbiote was brought into the Marvel Universe in the comics, and I think that's the best way to introduce it into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I think it should be something that should happen post-Infinity War 2, have Spider-Man get the symbiote in a similar way to what he did in that comic. Then in a separate movie, introduce Eddie and have Peter struggle with that symbiote that he picked up in the previous movie. As a result of Spider-Man's dark persona... No, not that dance. Get that crap out of here. As a result of Spider-Man's dark persona, Eddie is humiliated and loses his job. It creates a deep hate for Peter from Eddie. Then when Peter finally sheds the symbiote, it finds Eddie. That makes Venom such a good villain to me, is both Eddie and the symbiote hate Peter and Spider-Man, and they are armed with all of his secrets because of the symbiote. Venom is also physically superior to Spider-Man. This would be the movie for Venom, and split the time in the movie between Spider-Man and Venom, with Venom becoming more of an anti-hero towards the end of this film. And maybe he has to team up with Spider-Man to take down a major villain at the end, or some kind of threat to humanity. Maybe have Electro or Sandman, one of Spider-Man's more power villains. And then end this movie with Venom leaning kind of towards being an anti-hero, or at least forgiving Spider-Man, Peter Parker to some extent, right? Have him leave New York to another city to kind of figure out what he's going to do. You know, he kind of allude to the fact that he's going to become an anti-hero. I think that'd be great. So then in that third movie, have a Venom standalone feature. There's a lot of humor in the Venom series from the 90s comics, and a lot of that stuff does show up in this Venom movie. But as I said before, it is such a small part of the movie, and it just can't sustain the lackluster plot and shitty editing. So you see, this is kind of the thing that the MCU does so well. It sets up a lot of its characters so that you understand and care about them over time. Even if they haven't even had their own movies, it doesn't matter. You still care about them. Hulk, Scarlet Witch, War Machine, Vision, and Black Widow, just to name a few. They've only been side characters in different movies, but they've had time to establish themselves in those movies as good characters, and you care about them because of that. So to sum things up in Venom before I render my score, Tom Hardy is good as Eddie Brock. His interactions with Venom are really funny and interesting. Definitely the best part of the movie. The plot itself is just serviceable. It's really reminiscent of an early 2000s comic book movie. That's not a compliment. It's not very good. Sony meddling in this project has resulted in one of the worst edited movies that I've ever seen, with important plot points plucked out of the film. A sequel is set up at the end of this movie that seems like 5 times more interesting than the movie that we actually got, and I hate when these movies do that. So in the end, what I'm going to give Venom is 5 turds in the wind out of 10. If you like this video and want to see more, please like and subscribe, or don't. I'm not a beggar. I'm Geek True 64, and I'll always tell you the truth.